Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Eric Fett. I'm the Executive Director of Netroots Nation. We appreciate you being here. This is the second week of virtual sessions before the start of Netroots Nation 2025. And whether you're going to be joining us virtually for the conference or we'll be seeing you in New Orleans, we've got a lot of great content this year. For our virtual sessions, you should see a chat function over on your right of the screen, depending if you're on your desktop or on a mobile. Feel free to talk among yourselves there. There's also a Q&A section if you want to drop questions in for the panel. I'll try to keep them notified about those questions, and we'll see if we can get to them. Enjoy the session, and I am going to bring on Angela, and she's going to get you all started.
Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I am really excited to present this session on behalf of Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. We are talking about seizing the narrative, the Black Panther messaging from then to now. We've got some amazing panelists that are here, and we're going to be talking about basically how do we address the regime that we are under right now. So I am super, super excited to bring to this stage, joining here with me, Xavier Buck, doctor. Let me get everybody's titles right, because it's really important that we honor the work that has been done and how they are operating in the world. So I want to make sure you all know it is Dr. Xavier Buck. He is the founder of the Black Panther Museum and the executive director for the Dr. Huey P. Newton Foundation. He will open with the historical framing on the Black Panther Party. He is a national thought leader on Black Panther Party history, revolutionary media, and movement memory. We also welcome Jorden Giger. Jorden is a South Bend, Indiana-based organizer and the co-founder of Black Lives Matter South Bend. He currently serves as the assistant director of Project Outreach for Black Sunlight Sustainability, and is a board member of Our Revolution. His work spans local reparations, environmental justice, and Afro-Indigenous movement building across the Americas. Gentlemen, welcome. How are y'all doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good, good, good. Jorden, can you hear us? Jorden, are you there? Love it. How are y'all doing on this summer day? Jorden, can you hear me? I want to make sure. Let's do a tech check. Oh, we've got Jorden off stage for a moment. Give us a minute as we work out some technical difficulties. Xavier, will open with you. The Panthers mastered revolutionary messaging under intense state repression. Sounds a little familiar. Today, we face similar threats. Let's learn from our past to shape our future. We know that the Panthers launched their newspaper while under heavy FBI surveillance. How did they reach nearly 140,000 readers weekly and maintain message discipline in a time where there was no internet? You know, these were hand papers. How were they able to do that?
Yeah, I think sometimes we overthink it because we have so much technology in hand. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. And, you know, their newspaper at one point was in circulation at 300,000 copies per week. And I think how they did that was really by being in community. Panthers were organized and living in Panther pads. You might have 10 people living together, right? Men and women, comrades in the struggle. And what that means is that it's much easier to deliver their survival programs. It's much easier to create the newspaper. It's much easier to distribute the newspaper. So, for example, there's these stories. The National Distribution Center was in San Francisco. And when it was time for them to deliver the papers, the police would make it more difficult on them by saying where they could or could not park and harassing party members. And so what they would do is everybody in the community would contribute from getting the papers from the distribution center to the cars parked blocks away, which means I'm talking about pimps, prostitutes, everybody just walking the streets, people outside, hustlers are literally grabbing the newspapers and making an assembly line, passing them all the way down the block, right? So things as simple as being in community, the people like Panthers who are taking care of you, and the people responding by taking care of them, right? That's how these things become possible. Even when we talk about the financial model of the newspaper, it's sold for 25 cents. And if you were selling it, you were able to keep a dime of that money. So it's kind of cooperative economics. But it wasn't just Panthers who were selling it. They were definitely doing it, but also it was college students. There were even kids that would sell it because it was the community that needed these funds. And it was also the community who wanted to read these newspapers. And the last thing I'll mention how they did it, by having chapters across the country. Every single chapter they would send in a news article about what's happening in their city. So if there's something about how they're solving issues related to, I don't know, rent control in Seattle, maybe it's somebody in Detroit who can use the same strategy as an example. So it's also about shared knowledge. When we have social media, a lot of times it's tailored to what we're looking for. But the newspaper was actually a way to open that up and say it's not necessarily tailored, it's really global news about how we get free as a people.
That's really interesting because we don't think enough about how working as a collective, we can get a lot more accomplished. In today's world, what are some ways that you think we could take that same model? I mean, we don't need to form, lines down the street because you can do things via the internet, via text. What are some ways that you think we could apply that messaging to getting the word out in our community about the things that are happening? That way we're not inundated with the misinformation that's happening today.
Yeah, I mean, right. We're not going to do the exact same thing they did, but we can take a large part of their blueprint and adapt it to our current times. So, once again, I think we overthink this, right? So, social media technology does not replace us being in community. You still have to have face-to-face interaction. You still have to know one another, and you still have to care for one another, right? The technology is a tool; it's not the end-all, be-all. So I remember I was talking to this Panther in Philadelphia named Stretch, and asking him like, how would we recreate, say, the survival programs? Right, the Panthers had 65 of them. People know about free breakfast for school children, but there's free medical clinics, free ambulance services, free pest control, free a lot of different services the community needed. And he was like, don't overthink it. Right, something like oil changes are extremely expensive right now. If you have a group of youth who are going into a community and they're saying, we're going to offer oil changes to everybody, because that's an expense that maybe people can't afford or struggle to. And while we're doing it, we're going to provide political education. And then we're going to have a conversation about why we can't afford oil changes in the first place, or why we're struggling to live day to day, as a way of something small, as a way to think about what the bigger picture is, right? Our struggles under capitalism, a system that keeps many poor and a few wealthy. And so, we have to know each other to be able to do these kind of things. But things like free medical clinics are still needed. Things like free ambulance services are still needed. There's a lot of programs the Panthers did that we can just recreate. Some like the newspaper, which we still need a hub for information, but it might not be the tangible paper because people don't do that anymore. Just got to rethink it a little.
I love that. And one of the things that we see today is misinformation. It's everywhere. And it seems, as someone that operates in this space, that it is very targeted to Black men. And how do you see, did we face similar threats and misinformation campaigns when, during the Panthers time? How was that handled? Because I feel like they don't come up with new things. They just come up with new ways to do the same old thing. So what were the types of things that we were fighting back then for misinformation? And how can we help folks understand how it's moving forward now and to fight back against it?
Oh, yeah, we've always had misinformation, right? We are people who were brought here to build this country against our will, and they had to get a large population of people in this country to buy into that. right? Only way you can buy into the enslavement of people is misinformation. With the Panthers, there's a historian named Curtis Austin. He estimates that 70% of the news articles about the Black Panthers while they were in existence, so it's 66 to 82, that 70% of those media articles are either penned by or influenced by the FBI, right? Misinformation comes from our major media outlets. We also know that to be very clear today. With the Trump administration, we see a huge change in journalism, journalistic integrity. We see that the media is portraying certain stories over others, but that's not new. We saw that under COINTELPRO. We're seeing it now. I think ways that we combat that, the Panthers, one of the most powerful things about the Panthers newspaper is that they were able to control their own narrative in it, right? It was a message directly from them. And it was a message that circulated widely. That was not only, they had a lot of text in it, but they also had the imagery to convey the exact same messaging. So you might not know what imperialism is, but the art that Emory Douglas is portraying will show you about how one country is taking over this other country's resources and completely colonizing them. And the pictures will portray that. And so it reached a much broader audience. And it even reached an audience that the mainstream newspapers wouldn't have reached because they're telling the story in a way that made sense for their intended audience. So, I mean, it goes back to one, people need to know who you are. They need to be in community with you so you can be a trusted source. The Panthers did really well at being a hub for everything, information related to what's going on in the world, information related to political campaigns, information related to direct services. Anything you needed as a Black or oppressed person in this world, you go to the Panther office. And I don't think they totally won the fight against misinformation because we still struggle to tell their story to this day, but they certainly did everything in their power to do so. And I think they did rather well considering the conditions.
Amazing, amazing. Jorden, I want to ask you, how do movements today prepare for narrative manipulation in real time, especially during moments of protests, repression, or uprising? Seem to be having a little technical difficulty. Jorden, can you hear me? Oh, we had Jorden drop. I'm gonna pitch hit that to you, Xavier. What are your ways that you see it is the best way for movements today to prepare for narrative manipulation? Similar, we just talked about how the Panthers did it. How can we do that today in progressive movement spaces?
I mean, one way that I do it is, well, I'll put it like this. I'm a trained historian. And so, anytime we flip open a book, we're looking at the sources in the back. And, we're really looking at not only where they're from, but, what they did with them. And it's important to understand your sources in an age where there's constant information everywhere, right? It's not just an information age, it's an AI age. There's a lot being thrown towards us. And so being able to understand what's credible and what's not is a really important skill. And I mean, it's the same thing with like news sources, right? I mean, you should know what kind of what political leaning the news source you listen to, right, is into. Everybody is making an argument. Every history book is an argument. Every news story is an argument, and so you have to know what they're actually arguing. So for me, I think it's about being better trained researchers, being better trained at what we're actually looking at. And there might be even a lot of need for workshops on that, considering there's a lot of manipulation with AI as well.
Excellent. Excellent. I think as we're looking at AI and how it is changing just everything, I'm not sure if you heard about the video that was with President. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking at how AI has the potential to not just manipulate the future, but also do a retelling of history.
Mhm.
And what are ways that, and that then begins to shape the narrative, because if people don't fully understand history and they've got something that's realistically feeding them lies, how can we combat against that, especially, and would love, to hear a bit about how your project with the Black Panther Foundation and the Black Panther Museum is really helping to tell that full story.
Yeah, I think so. One, we have the exact same tools our oppressor has. Not all of them, but I mean related to AI depictions and creation of these alternate realities, like Obama being arrested, which is shocking, right? We can do the same thing with a Trump, right? It's democratized in that kind of way. So we have some of these tools. And what that means is that we can create our own content related to the ways we tell our own history. There is some control in that. I think another thing that we're seeing is that as funding for public education is rolled back, and it's definitely going to disproportionately affect Black and Brown schools, I think there's also an opportunity for us to think more about collective homeschooling, to think about Black private schools. I have a close sister named Alexa Shield down in Florida, West Palm Beach, and she's over there creating micro schools, right? And we get to rethink the entire curriculum. I got Panthers out in New Orleans creating space so that there can be collective homeschooling. In our space at the Black Panther Party Museum, we have an exhibition about the Oakland Community School, which the first iterations of that were Panthers taking care of their own kids collectively, and make sure that they were educated and taken care of. And then when it grew and it opened up to the entire community, you get the Oakland Community School. These weren't always these trained teachers with all these degrees. These are Panthers and community members who said, we see a problem with the public schools and the way that they're really funneling our kids into prisons and not preparing them for the world. And we're going to go ahead and create our own school that teaches them how to think, not what to think. We're not worried about a standardized test, right? We're trying to give them a global worldview. It's not even Panther indoctrination. We're trying to just make sure whatever world that they grew up in, they'll be able to do something with it. And so, right, that was just a group of people getting together and figuring it out. And, to me, that's the answer right now. As far as just like, how do we take care of our own? How do we educate ourselves? And how do we really just wake up? Because our education has been terrible for quite a long time. We have made plenty of complaints about the Department of Education ever since No Child Left Behind created these standardized tests that basically equated to Black schools getting less money and white schools getting more money. We've been complaining a lot about a lot of these institutions. So I'm not as upset about them breaking up as I am about what could come in place because of who's in power. And so with that being said, we once again need to look inwards and we have to take care of our own. Right now, it is our only option.
I love that you say that, and especially because we look now, and I've been saying the new news is social media, right? Which
Yeah.
is largely ran on a lot of these platforms by, I mean, I am of a certain age, so we might refer to them as kids, right?
Mhm.
But there are kids, you look at Kai Sinat and, some of these folks who have a bigger platform and audience than all of the news channels combined.
Mm.
What are ways that we engage them in helping to be the messaging, and especially when you have some of them that have been very vocal in the fact that they don't want to participate,
Mm.
right? And they have no interest. How would you say, and I love that you say you take the title of historian, right? And were we looking at that big of a different mindset back with the Panthers? I feel like, always there have been young folks who felt like the system and politics don't involve them, but we do know the Panthers were able to engage young people in a way that really changed the world. So
Mm.
what are the lessons we can learn, and how do we begin to get folks to replicate that?
Yeah, it won't happen overnight.
Absolutely.
That I struggle with the answer to this because I think about the 60s and 70s, and I think about how like a lot of musicians were influenced by the Black Panther Party, right? But they were also influenced by the assassination of Martin Luther King. They were also influenced by the assassination of Malcolm X, and also even prior to their assassinations, everything they gave to the world. They were inspired by Stokely Carmichael when he coins Black Power down in Mississippi. Like there were a lot of influences, and enough so where we were actually able to have like different sects of Black thought. And I'm not saying that doesn't exist right now. It definitely does. What I'm saying is it doesn't seem to be prominent enough where we're actually debating it in regular conversations. Uh, and that might, as a personal opinion. And I say that because I'm wondering, like, well, who is influencing our entertainers right now? Right? You had like when the ice raids were happening in Los Angeles, they're still happening, but when it was more intense, you had Doechii who came on the award show and she talked about it, right? But it was like, well, who is influencing the Doechii? Who is influencing like the artists that then shape popular culture? You have a Doechii, you have a Kendrick Lamar, but you don't have like a Kai Cenat, right? And so I don't have a perfect answer for that. What I will say is that usually what folks tell me is that when the people fail to organize each other, their conditions will. And so I just wonder what conditions would hit him personally. Not, if it's a family member or something that's close to his heart. I don't know him. And so I'm just wondering what would make it turn the switch. Otherwise, there's always been people who money is the bottom line.
That's true. And I think it's actually good to know, as you say, there's not a right answer and it's not an easy answer. But figuring out. And so during Panther time, is it that we were in such a higher state of peril that people were seeing it more in their everyday lives? And it was harder to run from it. And we had less privilege and access to money in some ways and certain things that insulated folks. And so therefore they were more apt to be on the front line because it was hitting them. And maybe there are so many of our I don't want to say role models, but celebrities are that their celebrity status removes them. But we know in those times, they still weren't letting folks sit in the club, and you might be the headliner, but you still had to go through the back door.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I would say, maybe to an extent. I think we have pretty bad conditions now as well. It's definitely not exactly the same, but it's pretty bad. But this is one thing I argue in my dissertation, which is about Black folks who migrated from Louisiana to California, and it was kind of trying to track revolutionary thought between these two locations. And something I noticed is that even before the Great Migration, Black people in Louisiana and across the South were organizing in very rural areas, vast distances, and they had these tight kinship networks that were really pulling things together. They had these very strong, like visible social institutions that they would go to, whether that was the church, whether that was Masonic organizations or lodges, whether it was Greek organizations, whether it was political organizations they formed. They had like very visible social organizations they would go to and very tight kinship networks. And so when you get to places like LA and Oakland, where people are condensed into these very small communities, they're able to move city and county resources faster than white people ever could. They're able to organize faster than white people ever could in those neighborhoods. And, I find it interesting that like when the Watts uprising happens, everybody focuses on what was burned down, but people don't see Martin Luther King Hospital was built, Charles Drew University was built, Eugenia Village, a black project with Black architects was built. There was a series of programs and institutes that were built in those ashes because of how well organized the Black community was. And so I'm saying that today, I don't know if those kinship networks are as strong. I was born in the 90s, which means I'm born in the wake and somewhat in the war on drugs. And we know that tore up Black families across this entire country. And literally right now, this movement in this Trayvon Martin era, I feel like this is when we've been kind of trying to connect these dots between the past and the present, like picking up our movements, which never disappeared. People have still been carrying it, but I mean en masse, right? We're trying to connect our families back together. We're trying to get our social institutions back together. We're wondering if the church is the place or if we need alternatives, right? There's all this kind of trying to build up the things that burnt down because of the war on drugs, because because of mass incarceration, and it's kind of a whiplash. And to me, I think those are the differences. I just don't think we're as tight as we used to be.
That makes sense. And in order for, and so what would you say are some of the best prescriptions for us to begin to look at the messaging that's happening now, and what will activate people to a level similar to where we were with the Panthers?
I don't know. I don't know. Everybody, almost everybody comes into the museum and they're always just like, we need the Black Panther Party again. We need them right now, right? And my understanding is the Black Panther Party did exist in a particular time and place, right? You have the Vietnam War that's going on. You have the Great Migration, right? You have the assassination of Dr. King. You have these tighter networks of Black families. You have other social movements going on. You have revolutions across Africa and Asia. You have the Cuban Revolution. I mean, there's so many things happening, and there's still things happening right now. But for example, we haven't physically been to war in quite a long time, and I think that does shape our movements. Aside from the war on terror, quote unquote, but I mean a draft. Like we haven't had a draft in a very long time. Um, we have some global conflicts happening. Congo, Sudan, Palestine. We have those happening, but it's not the revolutions across the world like we saw. And so they are impacting us. I just don't think it's as big at scale. And then they're COINTELPRO in the 60s and 70s, but now we have mass surveillance. So as far as how we move is very difficult. I don't believe there's any phone that's not tapped in some kind of way. If they want, we've had stuff leaks that Verizon was giving text messages to the national security agents into the NSA. That was back in you fact check me. We asked back in 2013. Right, that was a leak. We know we have even much greater technology. Technology has grown over the past decade. So there's mass surveillance. We have security cameras all over our cities that track facial recognition and track license plates. And I mean, there's a lot there. So we're also working against something a lot more difficult. There's drones. That's a lot more difficult. Um, I don't know what it's going to look like this iteration. Do I believe we need a Black Panther Party right now? Yes, but it's gonna look different. It can be built on that same 10-point platform. It can recreate the survival programs. It can do everything that Huey taught us to do. But we also have to understand that we live in a particular time and place, and we need to assess our conditions and really move quietly about what the heck we're about to do.
That, it's interesting that you say that. Jorden, welcome back. Glad to see you. As Xavier talks about how we have to move differently, and as he eloquently says, even move quietly, how do today's movements face digital suppression, and deplatforming and algorithmic censorship? And what are the ways that movements today are looking at the type of suppression similar to what Xavier's talking about and the Panthers faced?
Yeah, I apologize for the technical difficulties. But yeah, I think that you named it. There's all these different forms of suppression, and as Xavier mentioned, it looks different, like in this day and era. And I think we're still figuring it out right now. Thankfully, there have been a lot of organizations that do or firms that engage in digital security that are offering free resources to organizations to help prepare for these times. But I think that, we just have to really be disciplined and diligent in what we do. And that requires using, encrypted emails, using encrypted drives. I mean, we're not all the way confident as to how, safe they are, but, based on what experts are saying, they seem to be the best technologies that are available to organizers in that time. So I know a lot of folks are using like Proton Mail, and there's a Proton Drive now, and various different other types of platforms and applications. But I think that is, we'll have to do more of that. We have to be less reliant, honestly, on these platforms that are owned by, Meta and by Elon Musk, right? Because we know that they're compromised. Even for our organization, last year, for much of the end of last year and early part of this year, we were sharing a lot of pro-Palestinian content, and that was being suppressed where we couldn't even post. We couldn't make posts. You could tag us and we can kind of like reshare it a little bit, but we could not make an original post at all on our Facebook platform, which in my city, that's still popular. I know around the country it's not. But we don't get nearly as much reach as we were getting at one point, and so we know that that's all by design. And so I think we just have to get creative, and we have to really, focus on reaching our folks where they're at. I think it's important for people to know that social media should be your entry point, right? Like that should be where you kind of get introduced maybe to the movement, and, get introduced to ideas, and maybe get involved in different networks and threads, and help to like ideate and learn. But, the real work really is being in community, and being in fellowship with folks. That's like the safest space. I know people are like leaving their phones in their cars now when they have meetings, just because there's all sorts of safety precautions that we need to take.
Mm.
I know that's not the best answer, but it's just like, I think, yeah, we're all still trying to figure it out right now.
No, I think that's real. And it's not we don't want the best answer at this point. We want the honest one.
Yeah, right.
It's okay to use paper,
Yeah.
It's okay to use paper. Real. It is absolutely real. Jorden, how do you think the Panthers infrastructure lessons apply today as we build movements? And it almost is, as Xavier said, it's okay to use paper.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the lessons around decentralization, are important. Even though a lot of organizations that are similar to the Black Panther had like a central committee, there were still, various chapters that had their own work, that had developed their own means of communication. And I think that that's really important, in the 21st century, because we have so many different types of technologies at our disposal. So I think it's better, that we're not all reliant on BLMGNF, right, to like amplify our message, but every chapter or every BLM organization or the like, has its own means of communication. So not just relying on Instagram, but also using group chats, using Signal, using to some extent like WhatsApp. I know that's really popular outside of the United States as an organizing tool. I just think that having a diversity of tools is important, making sure that it's not all centralized. And I think maintaining like simple messaging that's clear and concise that folks can easily understand. I think reels are really helpful, right? Because folks are digesting information differently, right? Like a lot of folks don't want to sit and necessarily read prose, but they want it quick. And there's pros and cons to that, right? Like we need to be disciplined, and we need to read, we need to study. But also we're trying to reach the masses. And so we have to have different forms of communication. And so I think that looking at the Panthers, they use art, they use writing, right? Like different ways of communicating political messaging.
And it's important to reach folks where they are and with the tools that speak to them. I think that's really important. And Jorden, when you're looking at, in some of the crisis moments that we have, and as we look at the regime that we're currently under, what are you seeing as a way that to effectively engage folks who are typically, and we talked earlier, Xavier, about young folks, but I don't want to just limit that, because I don't think the disengaged are just youth. There are plenty of people my age, 30 something, 40 somethings, who just aren't receiving the messaging. What are the ways that progressive movement organizations can be using or messaging to reach these people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the messaging has to speak to, I think, still speak to the issues and problems in order to, resonate with folks, right? Like, I think we have to somehow tap into the algorithm of what folks are, what issues most move people, and try to get into those spaces to connect with folks. Again, I think it's really difficult right now because of the manipulations around the algorithms. So a lot is like suppressed, but trying to be creative and finding ways to get around that, so that folks are able to to access the information that's available to them. But again, right now it's been very difficult to do that. Were there some ideas that you all had discussed? I'm sorry for all my technical issues.
No,
No,
but
no, no.
I,
Go
I
ahead,
think
Xavier.
for one thing I would add to that, I think that because the Panthers definitely ran on the actual issues, right? Like
Mhm.
when 1973, when Bobby Seale runs for mayor of Oakland, Elaine Brown runs for councilwoman of Oakland, right? They're not technically they ran Democrat, but it wasn't about the political party, right? That's not what pulled in all these voters. 'Cause keep in
Mhm.
mind, this is a Oakland that's like a third black, but they got a white mayor, all white city council, pretty much all white bureaucrats, and you got a whole bunch of black people who came from the Jim Crow South. Most of them ain't never voted before in their lives, and so it's like, what is going to wake this block up?
Mhm.
And so I think what the Panthers did really well is they set an example. So when they do their survival conference in 72, right, 1 year before the actual election, they give out 10,000 bags of grocery or chicken in every bag. They do 10,000 sickle cell tests, and they register 10,000 people to vote. And they're doing this as a part of their actual campaign, right? They're showing everybody, hey, this is actually how our society could be, right? You don't have to live under an economic system that doesn't work for you. We're going to
Mhm.
show you exactly how to make government work for the people here, as opposed to some of the top business interests. And I think that that example is probably one of the most powerful things the Panthers did as it relates to electoral politics, because it's hard for people to wake up and believe in something,
Yeah,
especially a corrupt system, when we don't see it. Why would we ever buy into it?
definitely.
And it's interesting because that I think is the way a lot of folks feel right now about our government system. And even when we were dealing with the last election, one of the things that you heard a lot were, oh, they're both crooks, right? Or they're both, and so messaging, Xavier, you bring a good point, and it's what we, in democratic circles, what they'll say is it's what is it, kitchen table or the economics, but it's also a little bit more nuanced than that. How, because you see today politicians from all blocks of life use some of those same tactics. They do the chicken giveaways, they do the some of the same things, but it's not resonating the same, especially amongst Black folks, right? And you will even have folks in our community, Black and Brown, and I think even there's also an education and a socioeconomic levels to it, that will attend all of these other things, right? Who will pick up their chicken, will pick up the things, but still won't vote, right? They still there's still the gap missing. What do, from I'd love to hear from both of you. What do we think is that disconnect? And how do we, because I don't think maybe it's the politicians that can do it. Maybe it is the organizations and the movement folks that can help bridge that gap. What are the ways we could possibly do that?
I'll just say quickly, I think part of it, and I don't know if this really answers your question, but when you look at typical politicians, and like I'm sure as we all have like supported campaigns, or maybe you've ran, obviously, Angela. Politicians tend to show up like right before election time, but throughout the outside of the election period, right? Like there's not really a whole lot happening. They're not out in the community. And so I think that's where organizations are can really um, kind of fill in that gap, or that's a way where they can sort of build up more interest in elections by being continue to be present and visible and amplifying the work that they're doing on social media to demonstrate that they are working to meet the people's needs, that they are showing up to council meetings, that they are doing mutual aid work, right? So social media and various, like, again, various other platforms, mass emails, text messages, et cetera. If you have those tools available to you, that is a way to keep your work out there and the message out there. And then also, you should, if possible, candidates should come from the movement, right? Like, and be able to leverage that work to be able to bring folks or gain folks' interest in voting. But I think that the way that traditional politics works, especially within the Democratic Party, that's a whole separate conversation, right? Like, if you run on that ticket and in that party, there's a playbook that they typically have, and that playbook isn't working because we know when we're in working class communities, especially Black and Brown communities, people aren't thinking about voting. It's not at the top of their mind, and especially at the local level, right? Like, that's where we see a big drop off in voter interest and participation. So I think organizations just have to stay on top of those issues, amplify the work, and really identify leaders within the organizations who can take that step into electoral politics. But we know a lot of folks in the movement try to stay away from that because you do have to deal with the party apparatuses. You do have to deal with the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the machines that control the levers of power that control the electoral system, and sometimes it's difficult, as we've seen from independent campaigns, even to get ballot access, right? So, yeah, I just think it's important to just continue to be present, visible, and amplify your work. Uh, that way, folks can feel inspired or trust you enough to want to vote for you.
Mm. Yeah, I felt that, Jordan. I would say, I think one of the main disconnects is that, like, the election isn't the goal, right? For the Panthers, the goal was power for the working class. And just like you said, right, it seems like politicians show up at the very end. The free breakfast program started in 69. The survival conference is in 72, 3 years later, for an election in 73. Right. That's 4 years of work, right, of being in
Right.
community,
Mhm.
organizing with community. And then these are folks that Bobby and Elaine people know personally, right, years
Right.
prior. So that's very different. Uh, and to ask people to vote, it wasn't like, hey, just get out the vote. It was, we're doing all of these things, and the vote and voting for these candidates is one thing that's going to help us pull it all together.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, I think when we get into these different political parties, there are other, as you already explained, Jordan, there are other things pulling strings. And so it seems like it pulls away from the community aspects, the grassroots aspect.
Yeah.
It feels like it changes people who even come from the movement. Feels like they change over time, and they distance themselves for whatever reasons, right? If you're a politician, a lot of times you're trying to be in that position for quite a while.
Right.
And there's things you got to do to make that happen. And I don't fault anybody for that, but it's a real reality of how the Black community and the working class communities really aren't getting what they want.
It's interesting, as somebody that's been on both sides, both in elected and in movement spaces. You all bring up very good points. And, a lot of the Netroots, our audience, are progressive organizations, right? So they are progressive organizations from all ends of the spectrum. And they are trying to figure out how to reach folks, right, in the same way. And so what would you say to them, looking through the lens of folks that of the way that the Panthers did this? What are some of the ways they should be reorienting their messaging and their organizations for this moment?
I would say my immediate reaction is that it can't all be about Trump, and it has to be about the issues that are resonating with the people, what they're feeling right now. I know they play, on some of the social issues like the right does, right? But I do think a lot of it is based in like kitchen table issues still. Like, folks can't afford childcare, groceries are extremely high, the rents, are astronomical right now, right? And it all feels like it's by design. And what I've seen in a lot of these, and it's not to criticize any particular, organization or anything, but there's a lot of, no king protests, right? Like anti-Trump protests, and I'm not sure if that doesn't seem to be, I know based on my own experience, that's not what's moving, people in my community, right? Like that's not what's moving Black folks, right? Because the rent has been high since before Trump got in, right? Like we know Trump is bad, right? Absolutely bad, and things are getting worse, right? But I think progressives really have to work in communities around the issues. And that means, and I think it's hard for folks, that means challenging Democrats, at the local level. Because when you're talking about communities being starved or over policed, right? These are democratically controlled cities, for example, right? Like we're dealing with Democrats at the local level who are pushing the surveillance technology, right? Like we know the Biden administration used a lot of American Rescue Plan money to resource police officers, right? And that's having an impact on communities. Like we're literally over police. There's cameras everywhere, license plates readers, like as Xavier was mentioned when I first joined the call. So yeah, I just think that progressive organizations really have to be in communities working around those issues and not just trying to encourage people to vote or register people to vote. Like that's just not what's moving people. We have to address people's real core issues. And also to Xavier's point, like because I think the Panther example is important. It might take multiple election cycles. Like you have to stay in it. It can't just like the end goal cannot just be to get someone elected. It has to be to meet the needs of the folks, who are suffering most and who we are ultimately need to activate.
Yeah, and I'll be quick just in response to that, Jordan. Like, when the Panthers they didn't win that campaign in '73, and there's a news interview where they asked Bobby, "Were you going to close all these campaign offices?" He said, "No. Now these are community information centers." Right. So Democrats lost. What happened to all those campaign offices? Right. All that the millions and millions of dollars that are raised, right, for a campaign when if people are losing childcare, why don't they open up a daycare facility, right? Why don't they set up the medical clinic? Why don't they provide subsidized housing? Why don't they? And I'm not even saying on a mass scale, just as an example, in the places, maybe in conservative strongholds, where people probably would align with those values, but don't see it and don't see what the Democrats could do if that was their mission to help out the working class. Right. I mean, they could just take the chapter out the playbook of the Panthers of creating the example that the people want to see and then funding it when they're actually in office instead of surveillance.
Whew, that's powerful. I love that. And it's, it's like you said, where are they when election time ends? And we have been joined by Kirsten West Savali. So glad to have you, Kirsten. Kirsten is the Vice President of Content at iOne Digital, the digital division of Urban One. And she's a former senior executive editor at Essence and an award-winning journalist. Her work explores the intersections of race, gender, and justice. And she brings a critical media perspective to this session. I'm so glad to have you here, connecting narrative control to structural harm, policy accountability, and cultural strategy. Kristen, I know you're jumping right in, but you've shaped storytelling for one of the most influential Black media brands. How do we sustain our impact when the news cycle moves quickly and disinformation spreads fast?
Thank you so much for that, Angela. There's some noise, so you may hear some noise out there, but it is throughout my career, it has always been really, really critical for me to pass the mic to people who are doing the work. And by that I mean that it is important for us to make sure that our stories are centered, whether it's in the news cycle or it's not. Because what is going on with the Black people, what is going on in our communities is always news to our families, is always news to our communities, is always impacting us on a day-to-day basis. So even when it's outside of the news cycle, we create our own cycles in ways that should be impactful. And again, it is passing the mic. One of the things I tell my team all the time is that we have not just the power, but the responsibility to make local stories national. And by that, I mean, you look at Tamir Rice, you look at Trayvon Martin, you look at Sandra Bland, you look at Kendra Chapman in Alabama. All these stories happen in local communities. So making sure that our stories are centered in a way that we create national audiences around them is something that's been really, really important in this work.
I think you're muted, Angela.
You know, all these, we've been on Zoom now years.
There you go.
We're still in Le Struggle. Thank you for your grace. I love that you spoke on that, because part of this also talks about journalism as resistance and understanding you have to do balance, right? But then there's also speaking truth to power, which is something that the Panthers did. Kristen, you might have missed. Xavier just did a great point talking about how in communities they set up all these campaign shops or campaign offices, and then they close them up. And one way that they could have greater impacts and engage people is keeping those open and making them into something that helps the community in the long term, which is what was done by the Panthers when they lost their elections in the 70s. What are some ways that that you see also that journalists can help to carry over the election year gaps that happen in coverage of politics to help people understand how it affects their daily lives, not just in the rigors of an election cycle?
Well, a few things. And one, I'm so glad to be here with you, Dr. Buck. I actually worked with Gloria Clark, who honored me by asking me to serve on the board of directors with AMC for Mark Clark. You know, as we all know, who was assassinated, was Chairman Fred Hampton. He was deputy defense captain of the Peoria BPP. And so it's really the Panthers' work and how it has influenced my life, and also how it has influenced my journalism. I always try to center what resistance organizations are doing. And to make sure when we talk about gap years, Angela, is that there's always work that is being done. I always say that never say nobody's talking about it, right? Because somebody is always talking about it. Someone's always talking about it. When we talk about what is fair and balanced, and I mentioned this in the panel yesterday, it is fair to speak back to power, because what media has done is silenced resistance. It has silenced speaking back to oppression. It has silenced that. So the media that we have is not fair and balanced. It is riddled with white supremacy. What we have is a media who asks itself the what, but refuses to ask the where, the why, the how, the when, because we don't want the nation does not want to indict itself. So during those off cycles, what they call off cycles, for us, there are no days off. It's still amplifying what organizations are doing in our communities. And journalism has been a way for me to facilitate that, right? So it's looking at local organizations. It was, if something's going on in Chicago, what is BYP 100 doing? If something was going on in Florida, what is Dream Defenders doing? If we're talking about centering Black women and we're talking about our health and reproductive justice, what is MBEC doing? What is Me Too doing? What are Tosh and Cliff and April doing over at Black Voters Matter? All these organizations are doing these work to build collective Black power, even when there's not an election cycle going on. There should never be a conversation about, we're just talking about it now. Use that time, and journalists have a responsibility. We have a responsibility, a sacred responsibility, to not be beholden to what these advertisers and what these corporations tell us is news and tell us is important. Even when it's an off season, we need to amplify and uplift that work.
I love that. How do you think we balance that urgency with responsibility in public storytelling,
Mhm.
especially during uprising or breaking news, when they're the fact checking and you have the different perspectives.
Yeah.
How do we balance that in these moments?
When you say balance, because for me, and I found this interesting, that there was a time when we were reporting on the uprisings. I mean, this is going back to Stanford and Trayvon. We were first reporting on what was going on in Florida, that they told us that it was advocacy journalism, right? And they mainstream media looked down on advocacy journalism because it wasn't an unbiased point of view. It wasn't a perspective that was just, just middle of the road, which again, for me, is helping to be complicit in white supremacy. So in those moments, it is always important to remember that you don't have to sacrifice urgency for professionalism. You don't have to sacrifice the heart, the emotion, the pain, the passion, and the story to be a journalist. Because we saw, again, when it was Mike Brown and he was no angel, it was, we have to do allegedly, we have to do reportedly, we have to do this. And to any journalist watching, make sure you're not using police reports as primary sources. We have to go and get our own primary sources. But we saw when Hillary Clinton was running, it then became, let's talk about sexism. When Donald Trump is running, let's talk about fascism. When it becomes, about Barack Obama or Kamala Harris, let's talk about racism. But when it's the off season, when it's not someone running for office, then they expect us to be more calm and more, empathetic, a little bit softer with our language and not speak to those things. I would argue that we have a responsibility to bring, like Ida B. Wells taught us to be, both righteous and rigorous in our work at all times.
Wow. That's a powerful, that's a powerful mantle to carry. And
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of, well, sometimes it doesn't feel, I'm gonna say allegedly,
Mhm.
it doesn't
Mhm.
feel like all of the journalists carry that. And especially because I wonder if people on social media that are now often the new news, right, as that are carrying the messaging, have any of that sense of responsibility. Um, how do you see in this day and age what it looks like in what you're talking about, but also when we say protecting our storytellers, right? What
Mhm.
does that look like in practice? And what do movement supportive ecosystems need to offer to Black journalists and cultural critics so that they feel supported and free enough to do that type of the work that you're talking about?
Yeah, I would say make sure that first there's an understanding that if you are working in a corporate space, there are certain things that the powers that be will run from you saying. And I told my students this in the panel earlier today. I cannot tell you probably the number of rooms I've talked myself out of, just because they will say, I know she has the skill set, but we're not really sure what she's going to say, right? And so I would say reciprocate that when it is silent, when MSNBC is running reruns while our cities are on fire, when these white women-centered publications are talking about, Bottega and Louboutin and not caring about the world being on fire and our children being dead in the street, that these not be the publications that when your story is exploding, that you go to, that you invest in Black media in the same way that journalists who, for some, not all, that some Black journalists are trying to invest and get your stories out. Because if if the powers that be see that there is a reciprocal relationship, if they see these stories are important, if they see that we can get those stories first when it's in the news cycle, when it's important, when everyone is talking about it, I would just ask that to be in movement, to be in communities, means you go to a Black journalist to tell that story first. You don't go to Elle, you don't go to Cosmo, you don't go to the mainstream media organization. You go to Essence, you go to Urban One, you go to the Griot, you go to these places first, because then that positions us to be able to say, okay, they are the authors of their own stories. These are the media outlets that we need to be paying attention to, because then that helps us go to corporate and say, look, these stories matter. our journalism matters, because if not, then it's hard to argue for investment. You get in meetings where they're talking about ROI and what ad dollars can we get, and what's traffic looking like, because no one's reading it. So obviously Black people don't care about it, right? Because is not trafficking well. We know that's not true. So I would just say, understand the guardrails that a lot of Black journalists who are trying to survive are under as well, and just reciprocate. If there's a story, if there's something happening, go to a Black journalist first. And not, let me be clear, all skin folk and kinfolk.
That part.
The right Black journalist first, someone who's going to protect your stories, someone who's going to make sure the language is right, someone who has done the study to understand what your organization stands for and can speak to that in a way that makes sense. The right Black media person.
Jorden and Xavier, hearing Kirsten talk about the balance that has to take place for the messaging to get out there, right? Because there's two different things we're talking about. You first have to, get the messaging and understand it. But then if you want it amplified in certain spaces, there's a balance that takes place. How does that for you all, how does that affect hearing that? Does it change your strategy at all? Does it, so that it can be amplified more? Or is it better? Do you feel it's better in movement spaces, or it's preferred to say, this is what the strategy we're going to stick to, and if that means it's not going to build traction, which means they're not going to be able to carry it and amplify it, so be it? Or is there a balance?
Yeah, I think it depends, right? Like, I think the focus of most Black organizations is that we want to reach our people, especially those that are grassrooted, and so we want to connect with Black, media professionals. Angela and I were at the National Black Radical Organizing Conference that was here in Indiana and Indianapolis, and they had folks from Black media, or Black journalists, who were talking about the importance of their work in the storytelling. And I think we have to continue to, support those journalists and support those outlets to get our stories out there. And to Kirsten's point, we are reading that. We can see the reach that Black media outlets have. Unfortunately, if you are, working with organizations that maybe rely on like foundation funding, et cetera, they want to see that. They essentially want to see you get into those mainstream platforms. They want to see you in the New York Times, on USA Today, various outlets, right? Because that becomes a stamp that your work is gaining traction, and that you're building more visibility around the issues that you're working to address. But I think, like, for us and the work that we do, it's important that we tell Black stories in Black media, because I think our folks need to understand like what is happening to us. And as Kirsten mentioned, the other outlets, like, they are not media platforms, are not interested in our stories. They don't see the ROI. But Black media is investing in us because they serve us essentially, right? Like, they know that we are their core audience, and they're also these journalists are come from the same circumstances, right? Like, they have family that have been impacted by police brutality, et cetera. So these stories are more real and relatable. And so I think we just have to continue to support independent, Black owned media. Yeah, so it doesn't change our strategy. I think it just depends
Yeah.
on, who is influencing your work.
And if I could just respond to that real quick, because I 100% get it. I think we face some of the same difficulties, right? It's because you have to be in those mainstream outlets to get credence for your work, and they want us to be able to show a ROI to prove why this story matters. It's that same, and at the middle of it is this fracturing of the ways in which we're able to tell Black stories with authenticity and power, because we're beholden to people who basically help us survive, to basically help us exist, to be able to do the work that we need to do. So kudos to you all, for the strategy that you do. It's really one of those things where we have to find like-minded organizers and resistors within our own organizations to help make sure we get these stories out there.
Yeah, I would also add, because I think less on the movement side, but as somebody who runs a museum, we kind of are telling I definitely agree. We go to Black journalists first. We always do. They're often at some of the mainstream outlets, though. But
Mhm.
we're actually doing two things. We're telling Black stories, and for me, we're also telling white stories. Because when we go to folks like
Mhm.
the San Francisco Chronicle or the AP, we're also asking them to rectify the narrative they had of the Panthers back in the day when the
Mhm.
FBI was influencing them. And that is a white story for them to tell.
Yeah.
And so we're kind
Absolutely.
of doing two things, right, as far as Black storytellers. We're trying to legitimize and safekeep and protect our narrative about the Panthers. And we're also trying to tell everybody this is what the white folks did to us, and we should be rallying around them not doing it again. Right. And so I agree wholeheartedly. We just been doing two different strategies at the same time.
I like that. I like that. It makes me think, um, Xavier, I'd love for you to lead, but would love to hear from everyone. If the Panthers had social media, what do you think they would have done with it? What would they have refused to do with it? How do you think they would have navigated or utilized that tool?
Well, quite honestly, I don't know if the Panthers would have been as popular in a social media era because there were a lot of Black Power organizations, a lot of orgs at that time. And the Panthers, one of the reasons they popped is because people saw Huey defending himself with a gun and providing political education and knowing the law like the back of their hands. So much so that they changed the laws in the state of California related to conceal and carry. And that was kind of shocking at that time, right?
Mm,
It wasn't shocking to see Black people with guns. We were all from the South for the most part. We hunted. A lot of us were, I'll talk about my family, we were country, right? Like we knew guns, but to defend ourselves from police, that was something that would get us lynched. And so that was shocking at that time. One thing that social media does is it desensitizes us and numbs us to a lot of the things going on in our lives. And so, in a lot of ways, nothing feels shocking anymore,
Yeah.
right? We just saw a video the other day of that Black man who gets the window of his car broken into and he gets pulled out and jumped. And, trust me, I felt it, but it's not the first video, right? We've seen so many of these videos. We already knew what was going to happen. We're just happy he's alive, right? And so that shock value goes away. And that was actually one of the greatest tools that the Panthers had. So I don't know if they would have existed in this social media generation.
that's real.
I don't know what others think.
Jorden, Christian, what are your thoughts?
I don't know that they would have used it necessarily. That would be my only I can see someone like the chairman going back and forth with some people saying something ridiculous and going viral over something that he said. I can for sure see that. But then I can also see them being of the mind that social media was too forward facing and that you don't strategize or have those kind of conversations in public ways, right? Like I would have to think about that a little bit. There's a way to say viral and popular content. I can definitely see that. But I would see them on more like Signal, you know, and really
Not getting
where
leaked.
yeah, like right. Like where can we say because the Panthers would be monitored and surveilled on social media just like they were in everyday life. So I don't know. I can see them going viral for sure if they did utilize it. I think it definitely would be messaging. It definitely would be hashtags. It definitely would be different things, clips of speeches being used, snackable content. I can see the 10-point plan being in a graphic with 10 reels on IG that to amplify support for sure.
You raise a good point, Kirsten. The question, is it that we're too forward facing? Xavier, Jorden, do you think
Mm.
does that weaken our movement? Does that weaken our messaging that everything is so out there? And was some of the power in the Panther movement the fact that, like you said earlier, Xavier, it was, a hand line of getting the newspapers out that included everyone from the cooks, the cleaners, the pimps. And is that will that actually going insular make us better?
I mean,
I
I
think,
think you
go ahead.
just quickly, I think you have to be, strategic, and it's the question is always kind of like to what end. When I talk with movement veterans, I mean, folks are not thinking that you can use social media to organize the masses, obviously, but it's a great way to amplify the work that's being done, and also to put out whatever your whatever your organization's political line is, right? So there's some uses to it, but I don't think that we can get totally caught up. And I know this was mentioned many, many years ago, when the social media boom was really first beginning to happen. People started talking about people being social media activists, etc. So I think the use will be very like limited and very like strategic and planned and coordinated to reach, a goal. But I think the power in the Panthers is really them being like front and center on the ground, meeting folks' needs, being visible and accessible, to folks. I just don't think that we can underestimate that. And I think that's also the beauty of decentralization, right? Like, so that we can reach and touch folks wherever we are, and we're not just whatever the media decides, whatever the narrative is around in the media. Like, folks see the work that you do on the ground, and that shapes their, opinion of you and their level of investment in the work that you do.
Yeah. Tagging along on that, I think you need to have your social media presence. You just can't be doing it for social media. Like a lot of people do it for social media instead of capturing the actual work they're doing in community, right? That's two different things. If you got somebody following your organization around with the phone and recording everything and cutting it up and adding those videos up, that's one thing. We want to see the good work. We want to see what you're doing. But when it's like you're doing everything to become a social media star, right? To have that light on you, that's when it becomes a problem. You get those Instagram activists, right? And it's like, what are you actually doing for us? How are you actually taking care of each other? Right? So I don't know. I think they work. I think Panthers were forward facing though. They had their 10-point program. They had their leader, Huey. Even when he in prison, he gets created to this icon in the wicker chair. I mean, they were forward facing in a lot of ways, but they were also doing, 10 times more in the community in the background.
Right. Right. And I do want to make a note here too about accessibility, right? I don't want to social media is important. Social media has given movement so much more kind of reach. So many more have been involved. More people feel invested. So many more people feel empowered. There are people who can't be there in person. Then I don't want to forget, like our disability activists, people who cannot be there in person, who use social media to be a part and be in community with people as well. And so forward facing, I 100% agree the Panthers are forward facing. I simply mean like from a strategic standpoint, I think they would have found a strategic way, as you all are saying, to use it in a way that wasn't just for social media's sake, for sure.
Mm.
I think that's
But
really
some of that too, right? Because they were characters.
But still are.
and then there's that.
Plus, don't forget they had all the photographers and videographers all around. They were Panther photographers because you had to put all that stuff in the
The
newspaper.
fashion, the
They were doing it.
afros,
Come on.
Yeah.
yes.
It was
Yeah.
Gotta
it,
give it to them.
which okay, I was actually thinking about that because the Panthers didn't just report stories, they controlled the narrative, right?
Yeah.
And that was, like you said, it was because they had and they did it via the visuals, but they used fashion. What is some of that comms infrastructure, right, that could still resonate as a blueprint for movement today? Don't get quiet on me now, y'all.
I was going to defer to the organizers.
I mean, I think accessibility is a cornerstone. The paper was accessible. I think social media is very accessible to folks. It's on everyone's phones. Everyone is on it. So I think making sure that that your messaging and that your propaganda, for lack of a better term, is accessible to folks, and folks are able to feel and touch it or engage with it. Right, like is important. I think that's a critical component of the infrastructure, that legacy that they pass on.
I think that's good. That's good. And Xavier, you want to give any thoughts? Because I have a quick question for Kirsten as well.
No, go ahead.
Kirsten, if you were building the Black Panther today,
Ooh,
if you were building the messaging, we giving it to you, editor in chief.
okay,
You are the new editor in chief. You rebuilding the newspaper.
okay.
What do you prioritize in design, tone, messaging, reach? What's it look like?
Okay. Okay. Again, centering it around being righteous and rigorous. That just because there is an urgency, just because there is a righteous message, just because we're talking about our people being impacted, that does not make the story less important, less something worthy of covering, something that just matters to our specific communities. Like justice, again, for the truth, no matter who tells it, justice, no matter who is for or against. So that kind of framing of our stories are important all the time, that we're in community, but speaking to a larger message would be what I will make sure was important on, say, like a Black Panthers front page. You touched on also the importance of what I tell my teams is the more people care about you, the more they care about the work that you do. So a Huey Newton or the women of the Black Panther Party, how do we talk about them? How do we talk about them in leadership? How do we talk about the intersectionality aspects of it? You know, talking about the LGBTQIA community and Black power, making sure we realize how interconnected those movements are, connecting dots for people so they see themselves in the Black Panther story as well, but still centering it in Black power. And I often say there is a difference between the power of Black stories and the politics of being Black and political Black power. So when we're talking about electoral politics, if you're talking about the news cycle, you're talking about the election cycle, our hair is political. Our communities are political. The way that we work and live in community with each other are political. The way that we build our families are political. So there's a way to talk about the politic of being Black without talking about building political power. And I would make sure we talked about it all.
I appreciate that. And so Jorden, we're coming to you then. And so then how are you contributing to the new Black Panther newspaper and power movement? What are your thoughts?
In my lifetime of oh shoot, I'm so sorry. In my time of activism, I mean, I've done it all, right? Like we've done social media campaigns. I've sold papers, in St. Louis on the corner. I think that we have to just continue to deploy those tactics. I know some folks may feel like they're relics of the past, but I think that they're really important. I think it's important to be front and center and accessible to people and visible. And then also like documenting and creating campaigns that are amplified or on your social media, whatever that medium of communication is, or like creating campaigns and amplifying campaigns that are about issues that resonate to people, that are real. Um, that's what I think is, that's what I do. That's how I contribute. I'm constantly reading. I think political education is important. The Panthers use political education in everything that they did. And so I think we just have to continue to do that and develop these new tools that we have in ways that are liberatory.
I like that. Xavier, as the historian, I know you bring all that, but how do you see in this day and age in rebuilding the Panther and the newspaper? What do you think is the primary thing that would be great to ensure is included?
I mean, has a lot to do. I'll say it like this. I know I'm the executive director of Huey Newton Foundation, but I'm also just a student of the movement. I'm somebody who's heavily influenced by Huey and the Panthers. And for me, one of the greatest things that Huey left us is that he studied so much theory, and he applied it, but it only made sense if it worked on the streets of Oakland, right? You had to have theory and practice. And so, for example, the other hat I wear is my social media content, right? I do History in 3, and I reach over 1 million accounts a month talking about history, Black history, global events, political commentary. And it's very influenced by that idea of whatever dots I'm connecting. I'm going to talk about all the stuff I'm reading, right? I'm going to bring it in there. It's going to give the theoretical framework, but it has to make sense to how we get free right now in this moment on the streets of Oakland and every place where Black people are across this country. And so for me, it is about reinventing what the Panthers did, connecting those dots, both in this country and around the world with the diaspora and all oppressed people. It is about revisiting that 10-point program and saying, hey, okay, we still need education. We still need free healthcare. We still don't want to be over-policed and incarcerated. Is there anything we need to tweak for 2025, right? Or do we just repeat this platform? It is recreating those survival programs. A breakfast program in this very moment might not shock anybody. Maybe it would be good considering all the federal funds being pulled from food programs, but it wouldn't be as shocking as, say, free medical clinics, right? It wouldn't be as shocking as a micro school down in Florida that offers Black history, right? I'm just saying the things that are shocking that can actually provide a service, political education, and an organizing capability for those communities, right? All of these things that I'm talking about have to inform how we move today. It should inform our communication strategy. It should inform, how we connect with one another. So, I mean, yeah, for me, I do it on social media, but I also am building the Black Panther Party Museum, also building an institution at the same time. And those things should go hand in hand and inform one another. Because the only reason my content is strong is because I'm on the streets of Oakland talking with people at the museum on a daily about what's going on in our communities and what we should do to change them.
I love that. One last thing that I am going to ask you all in one sentence. What is one truth that our movement must tell no matter what?
Combahee River Collective. If Black women were free, it would mean that we were all free, because Black women's freedom would necessitate the destruction of all systems of oppression.
Mm. Ooh, that's real. I felt that in my soul.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I mean, kind of what I've been saying the whole time, the revolution won't be televised. Like, we have to be, it's not going to happen, on a reel. It's not going to happen, in a social media ad. It's really going to take people being in community and building, and given all the attacks on social safety net programs, we see that work, that mutual aid work, is more important now than ever.
Thank you.
I would say we will never be free under the economic system that slavery built.
Oof. Thank you. Thank you so much. I am deeply grateful to each of our panelists for sharing your insights and your power, from Panther newspapers to decentralized networks, from narrative survivals to narrative leadership. You've helped connect our past to our present and future. And I am deeply grateful for your time and for you blessing this space with your energy. And thank you again to Netroots Nation. And to every single one of you who joined this session or who watch this session in the future. The right wing is loud, but we are grounded in truth. So let's use that truth to teach, to build, and to win. Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.